The views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect the views of Money Radio staff, management, or advertisers, and do not represent an offer to buy or sell any securities. Some interviews heard on this program may be sponsored by the participants. It's time for Health Futures with Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth. This is Arizona's only show dedicated to providing you with expert advice on how to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. To learn more, call 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Bob Roth.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and it must be Friday, and indeed it is. We're coming at you live from the Scottsdale Air Park Money Radio Studios, 1510 AM, 105.3 FM, and the World Wide Web, moneyradio1510.com. We're here on the last day of June. Hard to believe it. Full stop. We're halfway through 2023. And we're getting ready to kick off an amazing holiday weekend, July 4th weekend, celebrating our independence. And it goes without saying, I know many of you are probably in your cars right now, heading up north to the cooler country up there, whether it be up there in the White Mountains or over there in Flagstaff, or you may be heading over to the beach in San Diego or going to LA. So please drive carefully. Please be safe. Enjoy the holiday. Remember our independence. What a great nation we live in. So without further ado, if this is your first time tuning into our show is about how our older adult population can live a healthier, happier life. They do that by listening right here to Money Radio Health Futures. We coming at you live every Friday from 12 to 1. We've been doing this now for 10 years. So the show's not about me. It's about the guests that we bring into the show, into our studio. And today I bring an extraordinary guest. I bring the king of all media.
Well, I don't know about that.
I got Rick D'Amico, formerly with Fox Morning Show. Rick, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, it's absolutely a thrill for me to be here. You know, I spent the first 19 years of my career in radio.
I know. I read that in your book.
Yeah.
So you're an experienced radio guy.
16 different jobs, but moved around quite a bit.
Were you doing news or were you spinning records?
I did like just about everything. I was a disc jockey, program director, did news,
Nice.
and had to move around quite a bit. But radio's certainly changed since I was in it in those days.
Yeah, it definitely has.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, it's not just radio anymore. They got podcasts. They got all these different things, different types of mediums that, and you can get it through the internet too. Like the mayor, David Pratt. We all know Dave
Morning
Pratt,
Mayor,
the
sure.
Morning Mayor Show.
Yeah.
He's been doing it digitally for a long time.
Yeah, he has a great business. It's internet radio, and he has a number of programs. I was on one of the programs a couple times.
I actually had him here in the studio with
Oh,
me.
really?
Oh, yeah. Great guy.
The thing about all the internet broadcasting is that you could do it at your convenience.
Right.
Maybe you don't have time to listen or watch a show at a specific time, but you could just dial it up on YouTube or whatever, and then it's at your convenience. And you can watch. It's not by time anymore, by appointment. It's when you want to do it.
And Rick, back in the day, I can imagine you used to like stack the cassettes into the cassette player, and they would play every hour on the hour, whether you were in the station or not, right?
I hate to tell you this, but when I started, there were no cassettes. My first radio...
No 8-track either.
No, my first radio job was at a little radio station in Albany, Georgia. I was in the Air Force. And they had these little reels on a little Magnacord tape recorders that you had to queue up to play the commercials. And then we had records that we played on the turntables. It was it was thrilling. It was my first job, and I worked there about 3 or 4 months, and they fired me. So that was my intro to the wonderful world of broadcasting.
Was it one thing that you did, or was it a number of things you did? Come on.
Well, I've always said that I'm just a blue-collar guy from a factory town in Ohio, okay? And so I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, outside of Cleveland, Wickliffe, Ohio, population 12,000. And I'm down in Albany, Georgia. And I tried to get into this radio station over and over and over again. They finally hired me. And the intro or the very first job you would get would be Sunday morning, playing music in between all the religious shows, right? And the program director told me, he said, don't play any loud rock and roll music, just play some soft stuff. So I said, well, can I bring in my own records? And they said, yeah. So I brought in, I'm from Cleveland, and I love music by black artists. So I was playing music by, Sam Cooke and Ray Charles.
Oh, love it.
Yeah, yeah. Dakota Staten. And well, they called me into the office the following Monday and fired me.
Wow.
1962. Or 63.
Playing rock and roll.
No, playing black music,
Black music.
on a radio station in Albany, Georgia.
In Albany, Georgia.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my introduction. And then after that, I got into a little theater. And when I got out of the service, I went into radio.
Well, Rick, I as much as I would love to talk to you about your experience in the media business, and I will tell you, and I know our listeners know your name, the fact that you did the Fox Morning Show for 30 years?
Well, I was at Fox for 30 years, but the morning show was about 20 years.
All right, about 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you came into our living rooms every morning, and the one thing I will tell you as one of the viewers here in our community, you always brought a smile to me because you could always tell that you and the hosts were all having fun. And it looked like sometimes you guys were playing practical jokes on each other, but you're hiding from one another. Whatever it was, you brought some levity to some serious stuff that is happening in the world. I mean, news is not good for us to digest.
No, and I realized that, and I think my background in radio helped me out with that a bit. And I always used to tell my friends there are actually two shows. There's the show that you see on TV, but there was the other show that happened during the commercial breaks and when the reporters were reporting would be the conversations we had with each other. So Andrea and I were very close, and we used to discuss all our family problems and family
Can we talk
issues.
about Andrea just real quick?
Sure.
Because you and I talked a little bit about it off the air.
Yeah.
So Andrea Robinson, somebody I met about 20 years ago, she just graduated ASU, and I think she went to the Cronkite School, right? Or
she went to the Hugh Downs School of Communication.
Yeah, Hugh Downs School
Yeah.
of Communications.
Yeah.
And her family was in the hospice business,
Right.
and she was working in hospice.
Right.
Oh my gosh, she just had such a caring spirit. At the time, I was the chair of the Alzheimer's Walk in Phoenix, and that goes back to like 2005, 4, 6, 7. And two of the times I had her come up on the stage and be our guest celebrity, host, if you would. And she was amazing.
Was she amazing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Captivating.
Yeah. It's funny, she was interning in the promotion marketing department. And when the promotion marketing people would come into the studio to shoot the promotional items for the following day, she would just stand there and watch. And one day I went over to her and I said, so you're going to graduate soon. What are your plans? And she said, well, I won't have anything to do with being on camera. I don't want to do that. And I said, really? You should try it out. And she said, no, I don't want to do that. But while she worked in hospice, she did part-time working for, it was a traffic company. Was it Metro Traffic or something like that?
Right, that's right.
On camera in a closet here at the Scottsdale Air Park. And we used that on the air. And she was kind of like our morning traffic reporter.
I remember that.
Yeah. And then we kind of worked her in and we talked to the news directors. I think, she could do well. And so finally they kind of promoted that job into where she would be in the studio, and before you know it, she's co-hosting, and then the co-host left, and then she got the job, and she was great. I had to take tapes in. I did take tapes into the news director, along with Ron Hoon. We said, this is the next co-host of the show, and so they hired her, and she was just amazing, just wonderful.
Well, I will say this, chemistry.
Yeah.
You guys had it. And you know what? Talk about local TV. I mean, I thought Lin Sue and Mark had it too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And nothing against Caribe and how that works, but I mean, there's chemistry that you see, and you just get lured in. And you and Andrea had great chemistry.
I always liked talking to people, conversation. One of the things I loved doing was having everybody sit on the couch together and talk about what's going on in our lives. Now, the bosses didn't really like that. They wanted us to read what the producers wrote for us. But, I thought that people want to know who we are, where we come from, and I always enjoyed that. I like the team effort.
Oh, yeah. No, I like the team effort, too. Time goes really fast here. And as much as I like, kibitzing with you and talking about, your experience in the media business, you're here for a reason, and I want us to tee up the second, third, and fourth segment, and that is to talk about this book that you wrote.
Okay.
And it's a personal story, and it's heart-wrenching, but it's one that has to get out there because you weren't the only one on this journey. There's so many others taking the same journey that you're taking. Rick D'Amico wrote an incredible book called How Alzheimer's Stole My Wife and Shattered Our Dreams. Rick, I can't thank you enough to be here in the studio. And these next 3 segments, I want to talk about your journey. And it's a journey that needs to be told because not just you, so many others are going through these similar things. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. We got 1 down, got 3 more to go. We got Rick D'Amico here in the studio. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and we are in our second segment here. If you missed that first segment, man, oh man, you got to go check it out. You got to come up to our website, click on the media button up on the very top. Right below its radio show, you'll catch this one and about 500 more that we've been bringing to you for the last 10 years. So, Rick, so great to have you here in the studio.
Thank you.
And, you know, I really do mean what I said in that first segment. You know, I feel connection to you even though I never met you before, because you were coming into our living room for so many years and always very upbeat and positive, even though, you know, sometimes you'd be giving us really bad news. So I appreciate all the work you've done over the years.
Oh, thank you.
And how many smiles you brought to people's faces and getting their day started. But you know, your journey's been an interesting one. And, you know, I have this book in front of me, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to write this book and really sharing it with others, because it needs to be told, because there's so many other lives out there that have had their dreams shattered just like yours. You know, we all, you know, go through this life, this journey of life. And, and, you know, I remember, you know, one guy telling me a long time ago that youth is, or you know, youth is wasted.
On the young.
On the young.
On the young.
And,
yeah.
and you know, they have no idea how valuable that is. And, you know, we all have these plans, and you and Ruth, who you talk about here in this book, had incredible plans. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about your experience and, you know, how maybe our listeners can connect with you, because there's so many that are out there. I mean, you open up talking about the data, and the data is overwhelming. When you talk about the fact that, you know, we have seen a 17% increase in Alzheimer's since COVID. We already know it's the 6th leading cause of death nationally. I think it's the 4th leading cause of death here in Arizona.
I didn't know that.
Yes, yeah. In Arizona, it's higher because of the concentration of elderlies that we have here. And the care cost over $321 billion. They're anticipating by 2050 that it's going to cost close to $2 trillion a year to really care for people.
And what about this? Among the 10 leading causes of death in America, Alzheimer's is the only one that can't be treated, can't be cured, can't be slowed. So when Ruth was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, January of 2016, the neurologist said, "You have Alzheimer's." And she was shocked, but it didn't surprise me because of what was leading up to that and her behavior. But I asked the doctor, I said, "Well, what do we do now?" And he said, "Well, make an appointment for next year."
So discouraging.
Yeah. And we did. And we came back the following year, and he said, "Well, the Alzheimer's," he gave her a test. He said, "The Alzheimer's has progressed." And I said, "Well, what's our next step?" And he said, "Make an appointment again for next year." You know, if you get a diagnosis of cancer or whatever, they put you on a program of chemotherapy, radiation, and we're going to try this nutrition, da-da-da-da-da-da. But with Alzheimer's, just see you next year.
Right. Just to let you know, you and I talked about it before. I heard Dr. Pierre Theriault say this a long time ago, and that is diagnose and adios.
Exactly.
And that's basically what you got.
Right.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
See ya.
Good luck. So what are you supposed to do? Just sit around and wait to die?
Yeah.
And so I was connected with the Banner organization, Banner Alzheimer's
Fine
Institute.
organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mentioned Dr. Terrio. He's one of the medical directors over there.
Right. Dr. Vikram Kumar, who put me in touch with Dr. Jeremy Payne.
Nice.
And I said, I'll never forget that name.
Yeah.
And they put me in touch, put Ruth in touch with a neurologist, a psychological neurological examination. You know, it takes 6 hours. You're drawing pictures. That's grueling.
That clock picture is a
Yeah,
really
yeah.
a telling one.
Yeah, I had to do 2 of those when I had a concussion in an accident, which is another story.
That explains why you're
Crazy. And then we got involved in the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. And the Banner Alzheimer's Institute, Dr. Danielle Goldfarb said, I want to see you every 3 months. I'm going to put you in physical therapy. We're going to get you working out. And I want you to go see the social worker. And I said, social worker? Yeah, the Banner Alzheimer's social worker. They have a department there.
Yeah, they do.
So I went to see the social worker, and she said, well, we have all these programs. Now, one, we don't want to get you interested in the Passport to Music program, where you go to the Musical Instrument Museum. You're going to learn about instruments. And then everybody, all the Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers are going to sit around in a circle, and a lady comes out, plays the guitar, and you all sing. Do you remember when you were in kindergarten, you played with the sticks and the bells?
Oh, yeah.
We had the sticks and the bells, and we all sang songs. Music is very important for Alzheimer's. It touches a part of the brain that isn't necessarily affected by dementia.
It's the last to leave.
Yeah, the last to leave, exactly.
Exactly.
And then the social worker said, now we have a number of memory cafes where you take your wife and you'll go sit in a meeting with Alzheimer's caregivers, and she will go off and do crafts and stuff like that. There was this one, which I'll never forget, operated by the city of Phoenix. I never knew of any of this stuff before,
Right.
you know. And they took Ruth and they put her in a meeting with other Alzheimer's patients, and they were doing crafts. And I was sitting there with Alzheimer's caregivers. And one caregiver said to me, do you have children? And I said, yes. He said, do you remember when your children were in kindergarten and they came home with artwork? And I said, yeah. He said, that's what this is going to look like. Isn't that sad?
It is sad, but you know what? You talked about the fact that you didn't know these things existed.
Not at all.
And no one really does. And that's why this book is so important. And people need to be listening to the words that you're saying, because you and I haven't really talked about this, but as much as that was beneficial to Ruth, how beneficial was it to you, bringing you together with other partners that are struggling as their family caregiver, the caregiver caring for one that has dementia and Alzheimer's?
Sure. One of the most important things is you're with other Alzheimer's caregivers, and the most important thing you learn is you are not alone. I was at one caregiver meeting. This was shocking. It was here in Scottsdale. My wife, Ruth, was out doing, I think they were making something in the kitchen. You know, they took the patients there. We're all sitting around, and the one caregiver said, well, I divorced my husband 10 years ago. And I said, what? She said, oh, yeah, we got divorced 10 years ago. But now that I find out he has Alzheimer's, I'm back and taking care of him.
You know, I see that more times than not.
Yeah.
And you know what? I really believe, and I think you do too. I mean, they didn't know when they got divorced that she had this brain injury, because that's really what it is.
Right.
It's a traumatic, or whatever you want to call it. It's a disease that takes over your brain.
Dr. Ali Atri, who is the director, excuse me, I hit the microphone. I use my hands a lot.
I know.
I'm Italian, you know.
Why? I watch you on TV. You never sat still. You were always running around.
Dr. Ali Atri is the director of the Sun Health Research Institute in Sun City. He's also on the staff of Harvard Medical School and teaches at Brigham and Women's Hospital up there in Boston.
Women's Hospital.
Yeah. And I was out there with him at a symposium. And he told me personally, he said, Alzheimer's can appear in the brain as early as 25 to 30 years before diagnosis.
Yep.
And I quote this in the book too, that there's research that shows that when it does appear that early with a couple, it's not necessarily memory loss. It could be paranoia. It could be agitation and confusion. And couples don't know what's going on, and they don't understand it. And I write about this because this happened to me and Ruth, and I thought we were breaking up.
Right.
I thought that she didn't love me anymore, probably could end up in a divorce. We're getting in plenty of arguments. And it's a serious problem that no one talks about, and I don't have any statistics on how many people break up and go back together, but it happens a lot.
Oh, I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet. And I will tell you that's why this is so important. I want you to talk about, before we get into the second half.
Okay.
I read about sailboats. and I know that you talked about your dreams, shattered dreams,
Right.
shattering our dreams. You have this desire to sail the seas, and it sounds like you and Ruth did some of this, but you didn't get to do the ultimate trip that you wanted to make, whether it be to South America, to Australia, wherever it was.
Well, we had our first sailboat at Lake Pleasant, believe it or not. And
I believe it.
Sitting out there, it's 110 degrees and no wind. It was a little boat. It had an outboard.
Well, good. I was going to say, did you have paddles too?
But then we bought a sailboat in San Diego, and we enjoyed that quite a bit. And the ultimate dream was to buy a bigger boat, and ultimately, when the kids are gone, we were going to maybe sail down to the Baja Peninsula. Maybe from there, who knows, maybe across the Pacific.
Right.
And I was learning, and we were sailing. But gradually, Ruth kind of lost interest in it all. And when I got this new boat, I didn't have it for more than a year and had to sell it because she just did not do well on it.
So you hear the music, got a little Jason Mraz taking us out.
Okay.
So, we love the tunes, and a great Friday here. It's hard to believe Friday right before July 4th weekend. But when we do come back, I want you to talk a little bit about the concept of ambiguous loss.
Okay.
Because that's what you really have gone through.
Right.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and we are in our second half here today. We're coming at you live from the Scottsdale Air Park Money Radio Studios, 1510 AM, 105.3 FM, and the World Wide Web, moneyradio1510.com. If you're just tuning in, I've got Rick D'Amico, formerly with the Fox Morning Show, and I described him as the king of all media. I think he is, because he's extraordinary.
Howard Stern might have something to say about
Well, listen, he's in the East. We're in the West. So you're the king of media here in the West. But, you've done a lot of things, including radio, and we talked a little bit about that in the first segment. And really the real purpose for me to have you here on the show is to talk about this book you wrote. And more importantly about the book is the journey that you have taken with your beloved wife, Ruth. And, when we really kicked off or ended our second segment, I really wanted you to talk a little bit about this ambiguous loss because, some people probably are as tenacious as you are, but a lot of people take it as woe is me and they don't look for resources. You were looking. You were starving for resources. You talked about it in the second segment that you got the diagnosis at Mayo Clinic and they said, come back next year. Basically, they said, diagnose and adios.
Right.
So, but you weren't going to take that sitting down, and you explored resources. And we talked about, at the break, adult daycare centers. We talked about the memory cafes. I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and ambiguous loss, if you could.
Well, when I discovered there was such a thing as an adult daycare center, I didn't know that there were places where you could take an adult patient where they could have a good time and be stimulated, and where you could leave them there for a while. And I found the Honor Health Adult Daycare Center on the campus of John C. Lincoln Hospital, North Mountain. Been there for a long time. It's funny, they also have a children's daycare center in the same building.
Yeah.
And sometimes they take the kids over there to visit their grandparents. They call them
intergenerational. I love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
And this adult daycare center was pretty amazing. One thing I remember about it more than anything was they had an RN on duty. Her name is Amanda Allen, if she's still there.
Big shout out to you, Amanda Allen.
She's marvelous.
Thank you.
She sat in her office that had a big bay window overlooking all the patients. She would observe them, and she would call me, and she'd say, you should buy Ruth Alzheimer's or dementia dishes. And I said, what is that?
Yeah.
She said, go on Amazon and look for it. There are dishes with a ridge so that you push the food against the ridge, it falls on the fork, and you can eat it.
Right.
I had no idea. And then one time she called me. She said, I don't like the way she's walking. I believe she has Parkinsonism. And so we checked it out with a neurologist and had her examined, and she did. So that was her third diagnosis.
Oh, gosh.
But that was a place where the patient could go, be stimulated, do crafts, watch music, musicians, Tai Chi, and then the caregiver could go home and do stuff that you can't do when you're taking care of your loved one.
And how important was that to you?
Well, the very first day driving over there, I was really apprehensive about it, and we were listening to 60s music on the radio because that was her childhood years, and I thought that would stimulate her. When we got to the front door, all the caregivers came out and went, "Oh, Ruth, D'Amico, Ruth," and they all put their arms around her and said, "We're going to have such a great day today," and they kind of slowly walked her back so that I could leave without her.
Right.
So
distract her.
Yeah, to distract her. I got in my car and cried.
I bet you did.
And I went home and sat down on the couch all by myself. And I thought, what am I doing now? I took care of her for 5 years, every
Right.
second of the day. And I was shocked. I didn't know what to do.
It's like taking your child to preschool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dropping them off for the first time.
Yep.
Yeah.
But Ruth didn't cry.
No, I guess she had a
child,
pretty good
the
time.
child probably did. Children probably do, but
Yeah.
But-
So that was a very valuable thing that I learned about through the Banner organization, really.
right. And listen, you know what? As hard as it was, you realized that it was for you. And I want our listeners to understand how important it is to get respite,
Yes.
because this is hard work.
Also, I would like to point out for the listeners that there's an organization in the state of Arizona called the Arizona Caregivers Coalition.
Oh, yeah.
Are you familiar with them?
Very familiar with that.
And the daycare center, for example, they charge. So you have to pay, and the minimum is 2 days a week. So if that's beyond your budget, you could talk to the Arizona Caregivers Coalition, and they usually get funds from the state legislature
They do.
to provide respite for you.
Yep.
So there's a way that that could be provided.
There's
for
also
you.
a national program, the Lifespan respite program out of Chicago, I think it
Oh,
is,
really?
and they get dollars from them as well. So,
Yeah.
so they do get adequate funding to help those families out there. So, big plug out there for the Arizona Caregiver Coalition, and
right.
and you can just Google them and pull that information down.
Another agency that I like to mention is the Area Agency on Aging.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they called and said, "How you doing?" And I said, "Okay." And they said, "Do you need anything?" I said, "No, not really." And they said, "What about your shower?" I said, "What about it?" And they said, "Well, they came over and installed shower grab rails, shower seats, and everything."
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And then another shout out. I'm assuming that you got some resources from the Alzheimer's Association.
Exactly,
here in
yeah.
town. So the Desert Southwest chapter.
Yeah, they're really good for education. You can go on their website and you could get questions answered, and I thought they were very valuable too.
Well, you know what? I talk about your tenacity, and remembering you on the Fox Morning Show, you never sat still, and you probably didn't take no for an answer. So you kept knocking on doors to find resources, and I applaud you. And that's part of what you're doing here with this book is sharing these these nuggets that you've uncovered and you've discovered, and at the same time you're still grieving. I mean,
Yes.
this loss is real news still to you, and I can't imagine that void. And as we finish this third segment, just want you to take a moment, and if you would indulge me and share a little bit about with Ruth, because she's what really makes you run and makes you go and talk about what you're doing. In chapter 1, you open up the most beautiful girl I had ever met. I'd like you to tell me a little bit about Ruth and
Really?
when you met her. Yeah.
Well, it's it's a story that I tell. I always get a laugh. I always say I met Ruth in a revolving door. We've been going around ever since. But and that's partially true because I was walking down the hallway of a radio station. She opened the door and hit me right in the face.
Did she really?
Oh, yeah. And I looked at her and I thought, wow, she's beautiful. I said, she would never go out with a blue-collar guy like me. She's the type of person or woman that would marry doctors and dentists and professional people, And so I was totally shy and embarrassed and couldn't even ask her to go out. And one day at the radio station, we were all going downtown to see he was a very famous comedian at the time, and in Ashtabula he had a restaurant, and he was a big national guy. He was on movies with Robert De Niro. And so I couldn't ask her to go out, so I had my friend ask her.
Oh my gosh, you're so chicken. She was that beautiful. I saw a picture of her, and you describe her, really long blonde, beautiful hair, The most beautiful blue eyes.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I don't know if she thought she was going out with my friend or me, but but we went out. We got married in May 2nd, 1969. We were married for 53 years. But you know the thing about loss, if we have time in this segment,
Sure.
was and grieving. And I write about this in the book, Ambiguous Loss.
Right.
I don't know exactly when I really lost her because she was diagnosed in January of 2016. And somewhere along the line between that and the day that she passed away, I lost her. I don't know when. In her final months, she did not speak. She was on a feeding tube. She was on a catheter. And I lost her. She was gone, but she was still physically alive.
Right. She was a vessel of the person she used to
Yeah. And so now that she's physically gone, I'm thinking, well, when do I grieve? Or did I grieve then, or do I grieve now? It's really a confusing thing. Ambiguous loss is something that I had never heard of before, obviously, but something that you have to deal with.
Well, as we close this segment, I want you to talk about some of the things that you reflect now on, because you talk about ambiguous loss and when did you lose her? All the signs were there. You wrote about a lot of them in the book, and I don't want you to spoil the readers or the listeners who want to get this book. And by the way, I'm reading the book. It's called How Alzheimer Stole My Wife and Shattered Our Dreams by Rick D'Amico. Amazon?
Amazon.com is the primary,
All right,
BarnesandNoble.com too.
And just so everyone knows, this isn't a book that you will take you. It's not a War and Peace novel.
No, it's like
It's 44 pages, I
Yeah.
think. So, I mean, it's an easy read.
you could read it in a couple hours.
And
I'm getting actually sales in Europe.
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
They're aging there, too. And there's Alzheimer's there, too.
Right.
So we're getting ready to close the third segment.
Okay.
Just one little nugget before we talk in the fourth segment. What was one of the signs that you got?
One of the signs was
That now you see.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it
you
was-
didn't see it back then.
no, it was paying the bills. That was like the major thing because Ruth handled all the finances in the house. She handled everything. I didn't do anything. They used to joke on the morning show that she's probably home mowing the lawn, and she was. And when I found out that some of the bills were being paid, I thought, well, what's up with that?
Yeah, no, well, that's a really good sign that people should take notice of.
Right.
If you're getting behind on the bills,
Right.
and that care partner is the one that partner is doing that.
Right.
Then
And it's not like we didn't have the money. I had above average income,
Right.
low expenses, but it's just not paying the bill, not knowing.
Well, we got one more segment to go. We got a little music taking us out here. We're down 3, Rick. It goes fast.
It does.
When you did the Fox Morning Show, how many hours? You got 3 hours,
I
4 hours?
usually did 3 hours. Sometimes they make you do 4.
Wow. Well, we only get about 40 minutes of talk time. So we got about 10 more minutes. We're going to take a quick break here. You're listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. We're down 3. We got one more to go. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You. And if you're just tuning in, we're in our fourth segment here. I got Rick D'Amico, formerly with the Fox Morning Show, here in the studio with me. We're talking about his book called How Alzheimer Stole My Wife and Shattered Our Dreams. If you missed the first 3 segments, go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button right below its radio show. You can catch this one and many, many more. So, Rick, when we finished the third segment, we talked about some of the signs. You got the diagnosis in January 2016, but there were signs that you now discovered or you realized after the diagnosis that you just kind of, looked the other way and didn't really make a big deal out of, and you shared in that segment about the bills.
It probably was around, I like to refer to it as the turn of the century, the end of the 1900s and the beginning of the year 2000. But
So it could have been 16 years?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, sure. Because we were arguing, we weren't getting along, and married couples, if they're in love, they have a connection, and we kind of lost that connection. And I didn't exactly know how to handle that. But then when I discovered that the bills weren't being paid, I thought maybe there was more to it than, love lost.
Right.
And one day I was recovering from an operation. I was convalescing from an operation, and I was sitting in the house in the daytime watching TV, and the TV went off black, and the lights went out. And I looked out the window, and the APS guy was there disconnecting the power. And I went out and I said, what's going on here? And he goes, well, I'm sorry, I got this order to disconnect. Said you've been notified for 3 or 4 months. And so I called Ruth, and I said, Ruth, they just disconnected the power, for God's sakes. And she said, oh, I thought I paid that bill. Now, usually they give you 3 or 4 months,
Right.
And there was a time when, I think we talked about this off the air. We didn't talk about it on the air. When I wanted to move to Litchfield Park.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did
And
talk about that.
a good friend of mine was the city manager of Litchfield Park. And I just love the community. And I said, I'd like to live here. And he said, well, I'll put you in touch with our realtor. And I talked to the realtor, and the next day she called me back, and she said, Mr. D'Amico, you have no credit. You haven't been making your house payments. You're way behind on your house payments. And I thought, wow. So I knew there was a serious problem.
Because you had plenty of money.
Yeah, I had a great job, plenty of money.
Yeah,
and
it's not like she was spending it haphazardly.
No.
She just couldn't connect the payments to the bank account and make it happen.
Right. And then after, when I took over all the paperwork and everything, I found things like birth certificates in the Home Depot file, unopened mail stuffed over here. Wow. So, yeah. So, see, I regret that I kind of turned my back to all that stuff and thought, well, I'm concentrating on my career. She's taking care of everything.
Right.
But, yeah, it got to the point where I had to take over everything. So I had to put everything on an auto pay and got the credit rating back up and everything. But there were times when in the middle of a conversation she would just stop talking. There were times when she would pick up shoes and spread them around the house and point them in different directions. There were times when she wouldn't eat. And I do a whole chapter on what it's like to be a caregiver. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, what you have to do for yourself, you also have to do for your loved one.
Right.
And I used to get her out of bed and wash her hair, put on her makeup, dress her.
You probably slept with one eye open.
Yeah, I did. As a matter of fact, after I put her down and put her to bed at night, I would have a little deck off my master bedroom. And I'd just watch and make sure she was sound asleep, and then try to see if I could find a movie or something to watch. But yeah.
That had to be so hard.
Yeah. The thing that really made it easy was she was very compliant, and she didn't speak, which was very difficult because I had no idea what she was thinking. But she would do whatever I asked her to do, so that was important. When I got her into an assisted living home, at first it turned out to be really good, and then towards the end, I didn't like the way things were going, and I moved her out of that assisted living home and got her into another one. And I would recommend that anybody that wants to go into assisted living should really check out who owns it and who's operating it.
Yeah, and also check with the Department of Health Services to make sure they're getting good ratings too, because they do rate them.
Yes.
And you want to make sure you get a 5-star rated.
As it turns out, the assisted living home she was in was sold without telling us. And the person that ran it did a great job until she sold it. And then all these strangers showed up. So I called the Department of Health Services. I said, what's up with this? And he said, assisted living home is it's like a business. Yep. He said, it's like an apartment building. They have 10. I think it's limited to 10 rooms in Arizona.
5 or 10.
Oh, 5 or 10.
5 or 10.
And he said that then they rent the rooms out. He said, now, there are many people in this business that really care for the elderly and really are passionate about it. I mean, some are just business owners who want to make the money. So I determined then that you have to know who you're dealing with and what their stake is or their skin in the game in that home. And when I moved her over to the new home in Scottsdale, it's called Colton Homes, and I love them very much. I talked to
Big shout out to them.
Yeah, they're really good.
All right, Colton Homes.
Yeah, and I talked to the lady that was running it, and I said, now, what's your position here? She said, well, I'm part owner.
There you go.
And I run this, and I talked to the owner, too. And so that's important.
No, it definitely is.
Yeah.
Rick, we only have a couple minutes left.
Wow.
And yeah, it goes fast. And, there was something you and I talked about right at the very beginning. And you mentioned it just a few minutes ago about the fact that, you had plenty of money. You made a nice income.
Right.
There was money to pay the bills.
You and Ruth were really smart years ago. You invested in long-term care insurance. Can you tell me your experience of utilizing long-term care insurance and helping pay for the care that your wife received and the respite that you received as a result?
It's probably one of the most important insurance policies you could have. That and maybe insurance to cover you for disabilities, but which I learned when I was an economics reporter. The long-term care insurance we took out years and years ago, because I did the morning show for 20 years, and 3 years before that, 23, maybe 30 years ago. And when I put Ruth into the assisted living home, they charge $4,700 a month. Long-term care insurance paid for that. They reimburse you.
Wow.
And the way it works is over time, you're paying into this, and you build up a dollar amount, because you have it, right?
I'm doing it, yeah.
And then as soon as you start drawing from it, your premiums stop, and then you have this dollar amount, which they draw from. Into the newer home in Scottsdale, it was around $7,000 a month. So I ask you, who can afford that if they didn't have insurance?
Exactly. I mean, that's over $100,000 a year, and most of the time it's pre-tax.
Yes.
So imagine what you would have to earn to be able to pay for that.
It's incredible.
And listen, Rick, I know I'm speaking on your behalf, but listeners, start planning. Start thinking about this.
I could tell you that I do have friends who I told years ago,
me too,
you need this. And they said, oh, my kids will take care of me. Your kids are going to pay $7,000 a month for your care. No. And when we started, I think Ruth's premium was under $200 and mine was around $300. Well, today my premium alone is $600.
Wow.
So it goes up, but
it does.
I think it's
worth it.
It's valuable and worth it. Yeah.
Well, Rick D'Amico, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, talking about your book, and for our listeners, Amazon.com, How Alzheimer Stole My Wife and Shattered Our Dreams. It's a story that needs to be told because so many are going through a very similar journey that you've gone through. Thank you for opening your heart and sharing that with me and our listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Make it a great day. Have a great weekend, July 4th. Happy birthday, America.
There's no place like home. You've been listening to Bob Roth's Health Futures. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call Cypress HomeCare Solutions at 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Or visit cypresshomecare.com. Be sure to join Health Futures with Bob Roth every Friday at noon, right here on Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.